There's a universal dislike for snitches. It doesn't matter what the context is. Kids in school don't like kids who snitch on them to teachers. Employees in office spaces don't like coworkers who tell the boss all their business. Even cops hate cops who tell on them to internal affairs. So you can imagine that when the stakes involved are life in prison, snitching is a lot more severe. Snitching in gangs is usually responded to with death or the threat of, at least it used to be until the last decade or two. There was even a point in time in which gangsters wouldn't even plead guilty to crimes, let alone talk to cops. But fear can only go so far as a motivator before the fear of the Justice Department becomes worse. Well, a group of gangster disciples in Georgia turned on each other in 2018 over accusations of snitching, and the fallout of their internal problems did much more damage than a snitch ever could. The Gangster Disciples are one of the largest and most violent street gangs in American history. They were born on the south side of Chicago in the late 60s when a man named Larry Hoover merged his group, the Supreme Gangsters, with a rival gang led by David Barksdale to form the Black Gangster Disciple Nation. Barksdale died in 1974 from kidney failure related to a prior shooting, and Hoover took over completely. In 1973, he was convicted and sentenced to 150 to 200 years in an Illinois state prison for ordering the murder of a man who Hoover suspected of stealing from his drug operation. Being sentenced to 150 to 200 years didn't slow him down even slightly. Under Hoover's direction from behind bars, the Gangster Disciples grew to an estimated 30,000 members across more than 30 states by the early 90s, generating over $100 million a year in drug sales. The gang eventually spread deep into the South, with active chapters in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, and across the rest of the Southeast. By 2018, there was an active Gangster Disciples presence in Athens, Georgia, the college town best known as the home of the University of Georgia, about 70 miles east of Atlanta. And that chapter, like every chapter of the Gangster Disciples, had an enforcement team responsible for disciplining members who stepped out of line. The gang's internal structure was built to enforce its own rules as ruthlessly as it enforced territory. The Gangster Disciples had long maintained a unit within each chapter called the Enforcement Team, a designated group of members whose specific job was to discipline people who violated gang rules. Violations could mean anything from failing to pay dues, to disrespecting a senior member, to being suspected of cooperating with the feds. It was a structure specifically designed to make violence bureaucratic, routing it through a chain of command so that the person who gave the order was insulated from the person who pulled the trigger. In the Athens, Georgia chapter in 2018, that chain of command ran directly through Philman Chambers. Philman Deshaun Chambers, aka Dollar Phil, was 34 years old from Atlanta and held a position of authority within the Gangster Disciples that placed him directly above the enforcement team for the state of Georgia. He was essentially the chief enforcer for the entire Georgia operation, the person who decided when violence needed to happen and who it needed to happen to. Leslie Chappell Green, who went by Grip, was 35 years old and from Stone Mountain, Georgia. Green was a member of the enforcement team and held the title of Assistant Chief Enforcer, which meant he was the person who carried out what Chambers ordered. Andrea Page Browner, aka Drea, and Lightbright, was 28 years old and from Athens. Browner was a member of the Sisters of the Struggle, the Gangster Disciples parallel female organization, and held a leadership position within it as an active, high-ranking participant in the tragic events of 2018 that would bring down their operation. On December 10, 2018, a Gangster Disciples member named Walter Brown was shot and murdered in Athens, and Chambers and Browner immediately started trying to figure out who was responsible and who was connected to it. Within a few days, Browner had made contact with a man named Rodriguez Apollo Rucker. Rucker was 32 years old and lived on Royal Court in Athens. He was not a Gangster Disciples member and himself wasn't a gang member or killer, but Browner had learned that Rucker was related to one of the people the gang suspected of being behind the killing, and in the spirit of hate and revenge that permeates gangs in times of loss, being related to a suspect was enough. On December 14, 2018, Browner met Rucker at a downtown Athens motel. She sent text messages to Chambers directing him to come. Chambers showed up, followed Rucker home to Royal Court, and shot and killed him outside his residence. Athens Clark County Police were immediately on the case. They reviewed surveillance footage, pinged Chambers and Browner's cell phones, and determined within days that both of them had fled the state to Texas. Browner was taken into custody in Mount Enterprise, Texas on December 15th, just one day after the murder. Chambers was in the same vehicle when police moved in, but he ran and got away. He was now a fugitive from a murder charge, hiding in a Gangster Disciples safe house in Killeen, Texas, and the police were actively looking for him. If you have ever had a stressful moment, imagine that times 10. That's likely how Chambers felt during this time, which naturally led to severe paranoia. Chambers started thinking about who might have told law enforcement where to look for him. He believed somebody in Athens was talking and, for whatever reason, came to a conclusion that it was two Athens-based disciples, Derek Ruff and Joshua Jackson. There was no solid evidence against either of them. No intercepted communication, no confirmed tip, and no documented proof that Ruff or Jackson had said a single word to the cops. Nonetheless, he passed the order down to Leslie Green that Ruff and Jackson needed to die. Green, along with two other Gangster Disciples members, Robert Maurice Carlisle, aka Different, and Shabazz Larry Guidry, aka Lil Larry, began planning the hit. The method they settled on was a ruse designed to get Ruff and Jackson out of Athens and away from anyone who might notice them disappearing. Intercepted phone calls and text messages recovered by investigators documented the plan in detail. Green, directed by Chambers, told Ruff and Jackson that Chambers needed their help, that he was hiding out in Texas as a fugitive and needed them to drive from Athens to Lawrenceville, Georgia, to break into some storage sheds and steal items that could be sent to him as aid while he was on the run. They were trying to help their fellow gang member and had no idea what was actually waiting for them in Lawrenceville. On December 19, 2018, Derek Ruff and Joshua Jackson drove from Athens to Lawrenceville and met Green, Carlisle, and Guidry at a storage facility, where they were shot to death and their bodies left concealed inside the unit. Green, Carlisle, and Guidry then discussed with Chambers what to do about the bodies, and those conversations were being captured by investigators the whole time, though nobody in the crew knew that yet. The options they discussed included burning the bodies or transporting them to a landfill. Meanwhile, Ruff and Jackson had been reported missing. Their families and people who knew them in Athens had noticed they were gone and couldn't be reached. Athens Clarke County Police opened a missing persons investigation. Investigators were simultaneously working the Rucker murder case and tracking the same group of people. With the full weight of several agencies on the gang's backs, it didn't take long for the bodies to be found. On March 17, 2019, nearly 3 months after the murders, Athens Clarke County Police, working with cadaver-sniffing dogs, located the bodies of Derek Ruff and Joshua Jackson inside the storage unit in Lawrenceville. They had been there since December. Chambers was eventually arrested and brought back to Georgia to face charges on the Rucker murder. Neither Ruff nor Jackson had ever cooperated with law enforcement. It wasn't even a suspicion. The DOJ's own filings actually confirmed it explicitly. Chambers had clipped the wrong guys. The federal case was built across years of investigation by the FBI's Atlanta field office, working alongside the Athens Clarke County Police Department and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Once the bodies of Ruff and Jackson were found in March 2019, investigators had 3 connected murders on their hands, all tied to the same group of people and all connected through the same chain of communications that had been intercepted. The challenge was building a federal RICO case that could hold Chambers accountable not just for the individual killings, but for directing a criminal enterprise. That required documenting the Gangster Disciples structure in the Athens area, establishing Chambers' role within that structure, and demonstrating that all 3 murders were racketeering acts committed in furtherance of the Disciples. The indictment was returned by a federal grand jury in the Middle District of Georgia in June 2022, more than 3 years after the bodies were found, charging Chambers, Browner, Green, Carlisle, and Guidry with RICO conspiracy and murder in aid of racketeering for all 3 killings. The jury convicted all 3 defendants on all counts, including RICO conspiracy, murder in aid of racketeering, use of a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence, and causing death through the use of a firearm. Philman Chambers was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms plus 120 months in federal prison, with 1 life term for Rodriguez Apollo Rucker and 1 for the Ruff and Jackson murders, treated as a single racketeering act, all without parole. Leslie Green was also sentenced to life in federal prison. Andrea Browner received 2 concurrent sentences of 30 years. Carlisle and Guidry, as cooperating plea defendants, received 20 years and 15 years, respectively, begging the question of if they cooperated with the police or not. The whole thing was one giant mess of poor communication, bad planning, and unnecessary violence. All 3 slayings were organized gang hits on the surface, but appeared more to be paranoia-induced killings of people who were simply suspected as being enemies of the gang in some way. And that is what happens when killing a witness goes wrong.